transparency's here. Like, it's not about transparency, but I think that in order for there to be stability in this environment, you have to at least project that you have some stability, that you have some that you have some values, that you have some standards. And I think that the Biden administration in particular has struggled to do that. They've tried to like be more balanced and sort of be more nuanced on these things, but you can't really do that in this environment because this bad actors will latch on to nuance. They will latch on to attempts at trying to placate things, and they've done that, and that's one of the reasons why I think that we've sort of seen the perception, at least globally, that the Biden administration is kind of not weak, but is not projecting as much stability as it should. I think that there's obviously some problems in the U.S. military, but it's easily one of the most diverse workplaces that I've ever been in, and the U.S. military attracts people from all different walks of life, particularly people who are vulnerable and people who are on the fringes of
and that want to feel part of
US
something,
life.
they want to be rewarded for
so
it.
I think,
so how do you get from appreciating that and also understanding the military code and doctrine for going, I want to blow it all up by sending these documents out into the world?
I don't view that as blowing it up. I view it as we were already involved in something that was knowingly spiraling out of control from our own internal perspective, and then the discourse and the conversation in the U.S., domestically, was so far removed from the on the ground realities, and this sort of cognitive dissonance being caused by sort of policy and sort of a misunderstanding about how how information flows in the 21st century and how information should be available to the general public is, I think, a major factor. I don't think it's not like, oh, I want to do something that causes something bad to happen. No, it's more like there's something bad happening, and you're just trying to shed some light on that, and you're trying to, or at least provide the larger context for that, like how we ended up in this kind of situation and how it was unfolding. And that wasn't, we now have the general, I feel like now we're in an environment where there is a lot more transparency, where we are in the age of radical transparency, where we see this stuff, and so the environment has changed quite a bit. So, and it hasn't really impacted or affected how we do things, which is another sort of factor in all of this.
And in terms of that decision, the day that you decided that you were going to pass this.
Well, there isn't a day. It's like I'm there for 6 months, almost a year at this point. It's a gradual process, and you sort of think through this stuff, and also you read history, and you learn about what's going on, and there isn't a moment. I know that it's narratively there's the attraction for this, but it is a very gradual process.
And during that process, at any time did you think, if I get caught here, this is going to change my life forever? There is going to be a catastrophic penalty for me that I could pay in doing this.
Sure, but I think the scales are different. So I think that because this had never happened before, nobody had ever gone to prison for disclosing information to the public before. It had never happened before. Never happened in U.S. history. So there was no precedent. There had been administrative actions, though. People having their security clearances revoked, which we were always terrified of. Having your career options limited. So I was expecting more of. Of me losing basically my future, which is the ability to maintain a security clearance, to become a defense contractor, to go down these different paths, and to be to just sort of have a career. And so I had this career that I was blowing up, and that to me was and access to education was a part of that. The funding for education and things like that. I viewed that as the end of my life, essentially. So, but nobody ever got in prison before, so there really wasn't a precedent, and I was genuinely shocked. I was not expecting that. I think that the expectation that people have that happens didn't exist before that until I came along. And now everybody's like, oh yeah, like, well, didn't you think that you were going to go to prison? And it was like, no, it never happened before. Like if something's unprecedented, like you can't look back and see that there's anything different, that something would be there. But I still thought this was like the end of my future.
Now, for those listening at home, we're talking with Chelsea Manning, the WikiLeaker, the activist, the author, is with us here at the Latitude Festival in Suffolk. We were supposed to finish 5 minutes ago. This is so fascinating. I'm going to take this right up to the news at the top of the hour, if that's all right for everybody in the room, because we've now got to the point of you going to prison.
Sure.
What is prison like in the States for somebody that is also questioning their own identity as well as what's just happened to them that they didn't see coming?
Sure. I just needed. There was some things that I needed. And I had to explain that because I knew I was going to have to go through a court, through the court process to access things like hormones and the care that I needed. And so I ended up having to tell the world and explain things and. And expecting, not everybody to understand. And so, but I needed this to survive. I view this as very much as a quality of life issue. This is what I need. I don't care about the bigger world politics or anything like that. This is something that I need for my survival and for me to feel comfortable within my own skin. And that was the fight that I had that I took on, and it became something bigger. That wasn't necessarily my intention. But it was definitely something I had that I had to go through, and I think that the process is fascinating. The process from my perspective is fascinating because everybody was like, well, what about the prisoners? And I'm like, the prisoners were super supportive. They were the most out of anybody while I was in prison. The prisoners my fellow prisoners were the most supportive people. We looked out for each other. We had whenever it came to any policy disputes between the prison authorities or the military or the larger U.S. government, anytime it was always the prisoners' side. It was always the kind
of almost like a union. You're like a union of prisoners.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would say that a kind of solidarity union forms among the prison population.
And can I ask then, because the personal, when played out in the political sphere, can feel incredibly cutting. I mean, the debate, if we call it that, about transgender reforms and what's going on in the world right now has gotten so much more heated since you started that journey. Does it sadden you? Does it anger you that the culture wars that are being played out?
No. This was expected. I expected this to happen. I think that we've seen this trend before, where after a wave of progression in the 1960s, you saw this reactionary wave pick up in the 1970s and lead to the Reagan administration. I know it more from the U.S. context. I'm sticking to what I really know and understand. But and we had this with HIV, with the HIV/AIDS epidemic, with the larger queer community. I think that this is just an extension of that, where we had some progress. We had a surge of progress in the 2010s, and now there's been a sort of a money-backed reactionary wave to this. I do think that certainly within the United States, a number of these reforms are being rolled back, and they're going to continue to be rolled back. I think that's very.
You try to get involved. You try to run to be a.
Sure, but I ran for Senate. I ran for Senate over more labor issues and things like that. For bigger policy issues. But certainly whenever it comes to whenever it comes to trans people, I think that we're going to face a lot of resistance and we're going to face a lot of rollbacks. But I think that just like within the larger queer community and the HIV epidemic and the last few reactionary waves, we'll come out the other side. We'll come out the other side stronger.
In terms of what you do now, as well as the book that you've got out that we've talked about, you also work advising companies on their security. I mean, presumably you look at the ignorance that is out there and people just don't have a clue how much their back door is open.
I think they do. I think most people do, but they don't know what to do about it, and that's understandable. I mean, I'm a professional. I'm a security professional. I do this, and it's hard for me to do it. If it's hard for me to do it, and I do this professionally, how does the average person stand a chance? And I think that's a problem. And I think that's more of a systemic problem. Right? That's like what big companies that are incentivized to collect large amounts of information, were able to, and what they were able to do with that information in terms of get people hooked onto social media, get learn all of our buying habits, et cetera, and using AI. And one of the things I keep talking about is one of the things I've been talking about for the last 6 years was the rise of AI, and now we're here. We're finally talking about it, and I've been warning people about just sort of like the collection of information, how it gets used in artificial intelligence, and the ethics of that. And as a security consultant, like the AI and privacy and security are directly connected. Like they're sort of countering each other, but they're also like directly complementary to each other in terms of like how they work.
Now, there'll be people here that are kind of watching what's happening in the States, all the news, not just the culture war stuff, and are confused. So in terms of your take on what's happening with Trump and his documents,
Sure.
and all that sort of stuff, where do you see the crux of that?
Well, I've never seen anybody in a very significant position of power who still has money and power backing them like face any consequences for anything. So I'm not particularly expecting anything to come out of that. But I do think it's I think that the trend in the United States is very alarming in the fact that things have been sort of going off the rails within the United States politically for about 10 or 15 years, and there isn't really any safety nets or any guardrails anymore. And so I can't really predict where things are going to go politically in the United States, but the confluence of factors leads me to believe that that the chances of something like and we already saw this like on January 6th where we saw the political polarization and misinformation, disinformation sort of cause this confluence of forces to lead to this like historic event. I think we're going to start to see more historic, unprecedented events within the United States that lead us to being more destabilized. I think that's the way we've been trending. And does it lead to a Troubles era style civil conflict or a years of lead style civil conflict? I don't know, but the same kind of factors that we would look at civil conflict as if we were looking at another country are taking place in the United States. It's just that the United States happens to be the richest and most powerful of those countries ever.
And he talks about the Capitol riots there, and that was kind of old school in terms of physical people physically marching on a physical building.
Sure.
We're now at a stage where there's also digital activism as well. We had the idea that over 1 million people in the States have access or top secret clearance. I mean, presumably you can
I think it's 3.5 million.
Well, exactly, like millions of people, depending on whether
1%
it's
of
military,
population.
civil, government, whatever. The idea that nobody else is going to want to let those secrets out into the world.
Well, they're getting out. They get out very frequently now. We're no longer in a world where the debate is between secrecy versus transparency. We're in the world of radical transparency. You can't keep secrets anymore. It will get out. But actors have learned this, the state actors and malicious actors around the world. So now the goal is you can't hide stuff, but you can create counter narratives and you can create alternative versions of things that people dispute and argue about. And so now now something will happen plainly in the open in front of everybody, and now there will be 5 or 6 different versions of what happened, even though you can plainly see. But there'll be that now the incentive is to downplay bad things by denying it's happening.
Well, and we saw that in this country. We saw that particularly under the Trump presidency, where there was just, you would be asked a question for which there is evidence, and then an answer would come back which bore no resemblance to the evidence that existed. But people were like tribes, and they believed in what they already saw and what they already thought.
Yeah, we're going to get to, and this is what happens when you're awash with information, is that the value of information becomes not whether or not you have access to it, it becomes whether or not you're able to verify that information and whether or not you're able to have that information be filtered in a particular way. I think that the filtering problem, as I like to call it, of information and the verification of information is going to be the pivotal issue regarding like how we deal with society and how we deal with like liberal democratic society moving forward for the next 2 decades.
So if you were advising President Biden now, what would you tell him he needed to do? Is it to be more transparent so that there's less people searching for things?
I mean, transparency's here. Like, it's not about transparency, but I think that in order for there to be stability in this environment, you have to at least project that you have some stability, that you have some that you have some values, that you have some standards. And I think that the Biden administration in particular has struggled to do that. They've tried to like be more balanced and sort of be more nuanced on these things, but you can't really do that in this environment because this, like, bad actors will latch on to nuance. They will latch on to attempts at trying to placate things, and they've done that, and that's one of the reasons why I think that we've sort of seen the perception, at least globally, that the Biden administration is kind of not weak, but is not projecting as much stability as it should, I think. I grew up in a small town, a very folksy sort of everybody knows everybody kind of town, which I talk about in my book. And I mean, it was kind of the mixture of both, because it's a world of contrast. So you have this everybody knows everybody world, but you also have this this bond and this relationship with small town communities, and with it seems idyllic on the surface. So and it can be that way, but it's also there's also a sort of there's also especially if you are an outsider or if you're different, then it can be an environment that is skeptical, if not hostile to you. So it can be very difficult if you don't fully conform to just sort of the social expectations and norms, which obviously as a queer and trans person, I tended to not do that, but I feel like it's definitely the kind of world in which the opportunities that you have before you seem very idyllic at first.
And in terms of the childhood, I mean, you were very computer literate from a very early age. You were online a lot. Was that because it was another world? Was that because it was escapism? Was that because it was just an area of interest? What was that?
It's a good question. Obviously I lived in rural Oklahoma, but my father worked with computers. So he had he worked in IT this is like the 1990s. This is very early on. This is before the .com boom, and I was like one of the early people on the internet. And I think that my early access to the internet, it was very, for the first few times I was on the internet, in the mid-90s, there was nothing really there. But by the late 90s and the early 2000s, I began to find various kinds of communities, usually around video games or around pop culture or around music. I became that's actually where I developed a really acute case of interest in electronic music, electronic dance music, which is something
you had a DJ set here last night.
Exactly. But yeah, getting to listen to this kind of music, you can't do that in Oklahoma. It's only country music or classic rock and alternative rock, and that's it. And there's 15 radio stations. They all play two songs.
Classic rock, you find a wife. Country music, you lose your wife.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And your dog.
And your dog, and then your trailer burns down, and your best friend leaves you.
Yeah, but I found electronic dance music and what's now known as electronic dance music and all the different subgenres thereof, and and then obviously the computer cultures and the subcultures. I was extremely online before anybody else.
Yeah, so I'm thinking of early Chelsea, a young boy at the time that feels
Sure.
out of place in his small hometown, who spends a lot of time online, who's potentially quite introverted because of that.
No, I don't feel like I've ever been introverted.
Right. Okay.
There's a strange perception that sort of happened whenever, because when I went to prison, I was kind of cut off from the rest of the world for a period of time, and I did not know what was going on in the rest of the world. I had no idea what was going on. But one of the strangest things, as I started to learn about everything that was going on, was there were these people who were like, oh well, you must have been alone. I'm like, who are you talking about? I used to go to parties. I tried to be a DJ. If you look at my Facebook post from the time, I'm with people constantly. I don't know where this
none of this screams U.S. military to me.
Why not?
Well, because it doesn't. Because military is about conforming. It's about wearing the uniform. It's about signing up to common standards and values.
Sure.
And I like the jump from one to the other. Why did you decide to go into the army?
So I mean, there was a confluence of factors. You had I ended up moving back. I mean, because I lived in the UK for a period of time as a student, and then I came back to the States, and I was my father kicked me out of the house after a dispute with his new wife. They've subsequently divorced, and I ended up living in Chicago and then moving in with my aunt, and moving in with my aunt in Maryland after a period of time. It's all in the book. and I ended up in a situation where I was 18, 19 years old, and I wanted to figure out who I am, where do I fit in the world. I was really like struggling to be able to pay to go to the tuition in college, because in the U.S. The college tuition system
It's
was
enormous.
it was starting to get really wild in this era, and it was starting to become too much for me to do on my own. And so a number of different factors, and then I was trying to rekindle my relationship with my father. My father was in the Navy, and he insisted, and he very much wanted me to enlist in the U.S. Navy or the Air Force. And I was still a little bit rebellious, so I started to consider enlisting in the Army, which my father was quite frustrated about, but still, it was in the direction that he wanted me to.
Somebody that's a former reservist soldier, the inter-rivalry between the services is big. I mean, that is a big rebellion.
Yes, it is.
You know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it was somewhat like conforming with what he wanted, but it was also a little bit different. And also, this was like during the height of the Iraq War, so it was like a constant, like it was a dinner table conversation in the United States. This was evening news, like it was on the evening news constantly. This was before you got bombarded with news on TikTok. So it was this constant discussion about it, and I wanted to feel like I was a part of something, and I felt like and the recruiters at the university campuses, and I finally was just like, you know what, I'm going to seriously consider this, and I want to be a part of something. I want to do something, and I think, and seeing this event unfolding and being like, I am in the right age, and they're asking me to do something. I want to contribute.
Serve.
Yeah, so I chose to do that, and I don't think that the U.S. military. I think the U.S. military is incredibly diverse. Like I found that particularly our workspace was incredibly diverse. Now like